So I'm going to turn it over to Barbara Campagna, and she has her colleague Jenna on from Silman, who's a structural engineer and who has crawled around all the nooks and crannies with me and Barbara to have a clear look at what's going on here. So Barbara, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Luke. Let me just check. Can everyone see the screen with the presentation? Okay, excellent. You just never know with Zoom. And you still need to ask. So I've got two big cats sitting on the table. If they suddenly walk across the screen, just ignore them. So hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on a Wednesday night in this beautiful fall evening. I'm in Buffalo, downtown Buffalo. Jenna, who's joining me from our team, is in Detroit. Are you in Detroit tonight, Jenna?
No, I'm in Ann Arbor, Michigan.
Okay. Well, that's not too far away. Oh, I'm sorry. That's right. You're in our Ann Arbor. So Luke had mentioned that we've been working together for a while, and it was actually, I believe, 2017 when Luke first invited me to come down and look at the church. And so this is just to show you that since we've been working on this project, this entire project, this construction project, has been going on during the pandemic. We interviewed for the project during the pandemic. We started, and here we are a year and a half later after we started this phase of work, and we're still wearing our masks. Fortunately, Jenna and I have worked together for over 10 years, so we know what each other looks like without a mask. I wanted to show you who our team is, and then just give you an overview on what we've been doing, why we've been doing it, and where we are right now. And then we'll have some time for questions and answers. We have an hour set aside for this. Hopefully the presentation will only be about half an hour. It's a very, very technical preservation and structural engineering project. So we will try not to get into the nitty-gritty, even though it's what Jenna and I love to do. But we're going to try to give you enough information to understand and ask questions. And then we look forward to talking to you towards the end of the presentation. So our team is led by my firm. I'm an architect and a preservation historian and planner, and BAC Architecture and Planning is my firm. My office is in Buffalo, and I have work around the country. I did have a New York City office, and I was in the process of getting a new office when the pandemic hit. And fortunately, I hadn't yet signed a lease, so that's on hold. So right now I'm fully in Buffalo. Our associate architect is Watts Architecture and Engineering, who are also located in Buffalo and New York. They're working with me to develop all the drawings and to do the civil engineering. Silman, and Jenna is one of the engineers for Silman and the project director for this project. They are in New York City, Boston, and as you heard, Jenna is in Ann Arbor. Barron and Associates is in Clarence, and they are a geotechnical engineering firm. And then Jablonski Building Conservation is a materials conservator who have been looking very closely at the brick and the sandstone and the plaster in the building. And so one of the other things I wanted to mention at the beginning is that this project is being funded by New York State, which requires that we meet certain percentages of the project, of the fee and the construction need to meet women's owned business percentages and minority owned businesses. So my firm is a WBE, a women owned business. Watts is a minority owned business. And Jablonski Building Conservation is a woman owned business. We also have another couple of consultants, Trophy Point, who are located in Buffalo and New York, have been doing our cost estimate. So as Luke said, he thinks we've been working together for a while. I first went down in 2017. I put together a team for us to review the building, to understand what was going on and do an existing conditions analysis. So I called it a preservation plan, and that was completed in July 2018. And there was a very specific reason that we finished it in July, actually like the last Friday of July. And that was every last Friday of July, typically, except during the pandemic, New York State has what's called the CFA Grant Submission. It's only once a year, And it's a grant that you can apply, that different nonprofits and government agencies can apply for. So we, Luke and St. Luke's applied for a $500,000 grant to support this work. And fortunately, the reason we're all sitting here tonight is that we were awarded the $500,000 CFA grant, which is typically the largest that they give. It was awarded in December 2018, and it takes a while to do the paperwork and get everything done. And so in addition, it has a variety of requirements, including, regardless of the fact that Luke had put together a team that he really liked, he still had to put out a request for proposal. And he received 2 submissions from my team. I put together a team that was a little different from the earlier one. And another team, we had interviews in April and May. We were awarded the project in June, and in July, my team started to work together. We started evaluating the drawings, developing drawings. Fortunately, there's a full set of original drawings that the church has that we had scanned. And our first team site visit was August 18th and 19th in 2020. So that was a year and two months ago. So we've been very busy since then. We've done a variety of probes. We've done some subsurface investigation, and I'll take you through this. We've done some masonry probes. We looked at the drainage. We developed our first set of documents in March, which was called the design development documents. And we met with, via Zoom, with the State Historic Preservation Office and reviewed everything because they have to approve all of our recommendations in our work, and they approved all the work till then. And then we prepared our first cost estimate. Everybody took a deep breath. We did some additional evaluation called non-destructive evaluation in May. And then from May through now, we've been evaluating the findings of that last testing, and we revised the cost estimate. So we just finished the revised cost estimate, and now we are just in time for this meeting, ready to make the recommendations, how to proceed with the project. This is just the cover of the preservation plan. So you might ask, why did you have to do this so many times? So this was really sort of what I call a reconnaissance survey, where we walked around and we looked at everything and identified what we could see without doing any additional testing or probes or opening things up, because at the time, the church did not have that sort of a budget. But our plan was to identify enough of the issues so we could prepare this plan, and it could be attached to the grant application. And then hopefully, and we got the grant for $500,000. So then we could pursue the actual project and what needed to be done. A few things we did do that we were able to is we took a variety of mortar samples, which is this photo to the right. We sent mortar and some sandstone. The building is what's called Medina sandstone, and a couple of bricks to be tested. So we understood what was the composition of all of the materials in the building. So we got together in July and August. Here's most of our team in August. We came out, spent 2 very intense days comparing the church to the existing conditions drawings, marking them up. And it's really important that we find that our team gets to work together. So for example, I'm the architect, and here's my associate architect. Here's Jenna, the structural engineer, and here's Helen, our conservator. And here's Joanne, who does our marketing and takes all of our photos for social media and helps with the business management. So we spent all this time together and looking at the building from these different eyes and different views. Here's just some, we took additional samples for more intense conservation testing during that time. This is Justina and Helen taking some more samples. And mortar is very complicated because you have what's called a setting bed and the pointing bed. So it's often 2 different types of mortar within this one, line of mortar. And so it's important to understand Where's the original mortar? And what's interesting about this building is there's probably about 7 different types of mortar that have been put on the building over the past, 100 years. So what we found in the preservation plan, what we observed was that the front porch seemed to be pulling away from the building. If you've tried to walk up these stairs, you know that there are issues getting up the stairs, that they've been pulling away. The ramp has a variety of issues. You are probably very familiar with the plaster damage on the interior of the building, which is right behind, can you see my mouse? Show, okay, great. Right behind this window. And we also noticed a lot of cracking throughout the bell tower, and then up at the top 2 floors, we noticed just water getting in everywhere. And so our observation in 2018 was that we needed to understand why the front porch was settling, and we needed to get a better understanding of why there was so much water infiltrating throughout the bell tower. So when we were together in in August, we all decided that we needed to pursue the subsurface investigation, which means digging down below the church to understand what kind of soil it's on and to understand if there's any kind of water underneath, because we didn't quite understand, why is this sinking? Why is it settling? Is it actually settling? So we had to put out, because this is a government project, we had to put out this package out to bid, which added some time we weren't originally expecting. We had to put out a bid package to hire a firm to come in to drill and do subsurface investigation, and also to do some masonry probes for us. Jenna, if you want to say anything about the subs, you know what, I'll just show these few photos and then I'll ask you to say a little bit about what the findings were, if you would like. So we got these big machines out to do drilling, to drill down. We went about 50 feet in 3 different locations to confirm what kind of soil the church was sitting on. And as you know, we're at the corner of 2 hills, so it's pretty complicated to understand how the building is actually put together, and has been sitting here, mostly in pretty good shape, considering for over 100 years. So we drilled 1, 2, and 3 different holes down about 50 feet, and we took the soil samples. We also did test pits, so we could take a close look at the foundation, see what's going on with the foundation, see what the foundation is built of. And Jenna's colleague Ed was here during this visit and got down to the test pit and did all kinds of sketches. So this shows what we found, what they took out when they did the drilling. And here's Ed looking at Ed and our geotechnical engineer evaluating the foundation. This is sort of MacGyvered. The good thing about when we did the subsurface investigation was that there was no water down there. So we didn't know, is there a river underneath here, a creek? There was no water, which was a very good thing. The only water was because some drains that came off the building had broken, and we very quickly, our masonry contractor just pulled something together. It's not very pretty, so you can still see this white tube when you walk down the street. When we do the construction project next year, that will be changed. We also did a variety of masonry probes to figure out what was going on with the front porch and with the bell tower. So as I mentioned, we thought that the front porch was pulling away from the church. What Jenna actually found, I'll show a few photos, then I'll ask Jenna to speak about this. You probably have all noticed the cracking at the entrance here, and this looks to be settling on either side of the main entrance off of Main Street. We got up and were able to look at the roof over the front porch. This is not a pretty scene. This is what's called flashing. It's supposed to remove water away from the roof and away from the masonry. It should be all the way back through here, because masonry, you think it looks really hard, but it's like a sponge. It just sucks up water. And so there's water throughout here. And if you have the flashing in the correct place, then the water will be relieved out of the building. That is not happening here. So that was one of the first really concerning things that we saw during our probe evaluation. We found a variety of cracks and which suggested settlement. This is throughout the front porch entrance.
Yeah, so if you want to stop up here, I could jump in.
Yep.
So as Barbara said, she retained us as part of the team after she did her initial due diligence to do an overall understanding of the building. And typically we as structural engineers are only called on to a project to evaluate things that may be structural in nature or are inconclusive in terms of what could be affecting the building in certain ways. And areas that, typical things that you would find with mass masonry construction that are structural in nature are vertical cracking, any displacement of the masonry elements, whether they be stone or brick. And so we started looking at those specific items with Barbara and the rest of her team to really understand how the building was designed to perform, how it was behaving, and is there anything that indicates that the movement in terms of the displacement of the stones and the cracking and the shifting of that front stairwell system, if that was anything that could potentially be an ongoing concern, because we know that a building, when it's laid out on fresh concrete or fresh soil, wants to compact that soil for the first, short-term duration of its life. But over the course of it, it incrementally wants to come, given how heavy a building like this is, it's going to incrementally compact that soil over the course of its lifetime. And that usually happens uniformly so that you don't really see anything. Nothing is exhibited in terms of cracking or differential movement. Now, when we get this cracking and differential movement, that to us makes us want to understand if there is some sort of foundational concerns where part of the building is still settling and part of the building is not settling. And that, we want to not only identify whether that happened 100 years ago or if it's still happening now. So that's why we felt the need to do all of this subsurface investigation. We wanted to understand if the geology was consistent across the site, because in certain areas you could have, really hard stone close to the underside of a building, and then, 100 feet away, it could be very soft clays. So there could be a shift in geology just underneath the building footprint, let alone in the city. So we wanted to understand if there was something like that where there's part of the building founded on something harder and part of the building founded on something softer that could be continuing to shift the building over time. We also wanted to see the drainage situation in the presence of water underneath the foundations, because if the geology does prove that that the building is founded under a consistent soil and that soil is, suitable to support the building, there could have been a system where underground utilities were running, diagonally across the corner of the building, and a pipe burst, and that pipe burst could have washed away soil in that one specific location, and that isolated incident because it could have caused a sudden shift in the support of the building. So we wanted to make sure that the foundations and the soils and any of the drainage underneath the building was in good condition so that we could eliminate, potential issues in the foundation support. And all that to say is that we found that the soil, the geology around the site was not only consistent, but suitable for bearing such a large, heavy structure such as the church. And we did not see any cracking or movement in the foundation underneath the stairs, which shows us that the movement that we see up in the arches in this photo is not translated down to the foundations and is not an active settlement concern. And thirdly, that the fact that there was no presence of water and no pipe burst or anything like that that suggests that soil was flushed away, suggests to us that everything under the building is suitable to continually support the building. So that kind of alleviated our concerns that there would be an ongoing settlement condition that we would have to address foundationally. And so we put that diagnosis to bed. And so we started also looking at the same time about why we would have a shift at some point in the history of the building where the stones differentially settled. And what we determined was, this church is quite heavy in terms of the mass and the amount of stone and how big a structure it is. And this little front porch in comparison is quite light. And so what we believe happened is that when the building was built, the building wanted to settle together, but there was so much concentrated load on the inside portion of the arch. So to the right of the photo where the actual exterior wall of the church is, compared to the left side of the photo, which is where the outside face of the narthex is, that it had no choice but to differentially settle because of the differential in loads. But that was a building construction, short-term, early life settlement that we believe is not continuing.
But then we still have the questions. Well, we still see a lot of cracking. And so what else is going on? So just to put the subsurface investigation to bed, our final report from Barron Associates determined that it's geotechnically determined that the site is stable and there is no evidence of any geotechnical failures. So that was really, really good news. Our concern was if it was still settling, what we would have to do to stop the settlement could have been even more complex than what we'll be presenting, we are suggesting at this point. So we looked at the probes. I mentioned there are a lot of issues with in the front porch. There are issues with the parapet and the flashing and the roofing. We looked at this area. This is a very funky little area. We've got the bell tower meeting the sacristy and all kinds of water damage that's been going on for about 50 years at least that we know of. So what we found here when we opened this up, looks like kind of a mess, and it sort of is. There are several layers there's Medina sandstone on the outside. Then there are 2 layers of sort of block material, and then 2 layers of brick. And there's a lot of water damage. There's steel throughout that's also rusting. There's wood that's also deteriorating, And so what's happening in addition to some minor settlement, but then also cracking throughout this area and the plaster damage, is that water is getting in from everywhere. It's getting in from the front of the porch and it's getting in at the bottom of the bell tower. So if you go up here, this is where the plaster damage is. This is the bell tower meeting here. We've got water basically just running down the bell tower into the building. We've got water coming down here into the building. We've got water all over here getting into the building. This was done a few years ago, and this actual material is in good shape, but the actual details for the flashing, which were original to the building, such as this, are really, and that's up in here, that should be relieving the water so that it comes down and goes out a drain, but instead the water is going inside the building. So finally, we went to the bell tower and discovered a variety of things. We found there were all kinds of cracks and displacement on the walls of the bell tower, including, probably the worst part is the south wall. That's the wall we just looked at right here. So this wall right here where the bell tower meets that funky little roof. We discovered that the roof is quite a mess. And a lot of this has to do with the original design. There's not a lot of room here for effective flashing. It puddles constantly. Water is just basically pouring from the roof through the walls down into the top two floors of the bell tower. Now, I always forget, Luke, which one of these was hit by lightning and was rebuilt?
The one on the right, the northeast.
Yes, okay, the northeast. So this was a few years ago, just when Luke started, lightning struck the building and this had to be rebuilt. But we started looking at all the turrets and noticed that there's a lot of cracking and settlement as well, including in the one that was redone a few years ago. This is one of Jenna's colleagues, and he was using a boroscope to try to understand how the wall of the bell tower is connected. That was one of our great concerns because the drawings didn't really show anything. You've got masonry, sandstone on the outside, brick on the inside. How thick is it and how is it connected? Because we see this masonry on the outside, the sandstone, it looks like it's starting to pull apart. And that's indeed what we started to find, that throughout where the masonry and the brick should be connected, either with anchors or mortar or grout, that there were huge openings, some cases 2 inches, 3 inches, even 4 inches. And this is just what we could see visually. We also had this concern about the drainage. We did the subsurface testing, realized that we were okay underneath here. This is checking the actual sewers. We did probes down into our drains as well to see if there was any blockage anywhere. There wasn't, so that was a good thing. So we took all of this information together, and at the beginning of 2021, we spent a lot of time talking and looking at this and doing sketches and trying to understand what was going on. And so here is, so you might ask, what is the main cause of all of this deterioration? The main cause is water. We've got inadequate or ineffective flashing throughout the building. A lot of it has to do with original design. Much of it is then also inefficient maintenance afterwards. Cracking of the masonry throughout, masonry settlement and pulling apart, and then interior brick walls and blocks, such as at the front porch where you see that plaster deteriorating from water. So with that understanding, we split the building into a few different areas. The bell tower here is called Area 3. We call this another area, the front porch, the stair, the ramp. And then we came up with all these different thoughts about what we needed to do and realized we still needed some more information. So we met with the State Historic Preservation Office, presented this. This is the design development package where we identified the main issues and what we need to do next. And they approved all of our findings and approved our recommendations. These were some sketches, for example, that Jenna did on the site to understand what was going on with the exterior walls and the brick and trying to understand what the steel was doing. And this brought us to the determination that we needed to do some additional testing on the bell tower. We were very concerned about the bell tower. And we decided to move forward with what's called non-destructive evaluation, or NDE. And we brought on another team member called A&A, who are forensic structural engineers, and Silman and my firm have been the 3 firms have all been working together on projects around the country for years. And they're one of the few firms really in the country and in the world that do this. And the whole idea is that you're able to use types of equipment to look inside the walls without taking the walls apart. So we did a variety of techniques, including surface penetrating radar, ultrasonic pulse echo, and fiber optic video scope. So I'm just going to show you a few slides of what this looked like. We did this in May May 12th through the 14th. A team from ANA came, Silman's team came, my firm was there, and we all spent 3 very intense days together up on a 125-foot lift, looking at the interior and the exterior of the bell tower. And we are very grateful that Luke bought a drone and is able to get these really terrific photos for us. These are the 2 guys, the 2 engineers from ANA and the masonry contractor taking a look at all of evaluating the stone on the south wall. This is one of the software packages. We stopped and took a look at what they were finding. This is the boroscope on the interior, trying to understand what's going on with the brick on the backing of the masonry the sandstone. Jenna and I went up together and looked at the top of the roof of the bell tower and the turrets. And so just some really interesting images to show what's going on. And Jenna, if you want to take over from here, and I think there are about 5 slides I can go through.
Yeah, and just to reiterate, we felt this level of study was needed because we had seen from the inside that there were voids. We had seen from the outside that some stone had started to pull away from the building, and so, you know, when there's isolated voids, that's no big deal. You can repoint, you know, remove stone here and there, reset it. But our concern was that water has been getting in and into and through these building walls for over 100 years, to the point where we were concerned that these voids created an interconnected network, where essentially the worst case condition would be that your stone facade was no longer connected in any way to the backup brick. So you would essentially have, you know, a foot thick or 16-inch thick stone wall that's 80 feet high or however unsupported. And, you know, the thinness of that wall can only support itself so much. So we want, and you know, that then becomes a life safety concern for your parishioners and anybody passerby. So that's why we felt that this part of the work needed to be front loaded and prioritized, and this study was needed to be conducted. And what we found was that the way that the brick wall and the stone interlock with each other is based on the variety and thickness of the stone. So this image just shows you that the exterior stone varies in thickness from, you know, very thin, less than 6 inches, to 16 inches or greater. And so that variability allows the thicker stone to get embedded into the brick wall farther, the thinner stones kind of just cladding in front of the brick wall. And so that toothing between the outer stone and the inner brick is really how the original designers, the original builders, envisioned the building staying together. They also, these images show the voids between in the collar joints, and the collar joints is the vertical joint between the stone exterior and the brick wall interior, and we saw variability in that. So there's some areas that are completely solid. That's great news. But there are some areas where there's up to 3 inches of a gap between the stone and the backup brick, which is a significant void. And so there is the potential that there are these networks forming, and having these gaps only exacerbate over time if no work is done to the brick. We also studied the thickness of the turrets as well, to understand how they were assembled, and if there's any voids that we could see from the testing that way. And you could see, based on the image on the right, that there's, again, a wide variety in thickness and sizes of the stone around the turrets, which allows for that interconnectivity with the brick backup. But we also found in the surface penetrating radar and impact echo that there are also still voids in the collar joints around the turrets as well. So water is able to get in between the stone and the brick and wash away the mortar that was originally supposed to be the glue between the two. On the left are select areas that we drilled into the mortar joints and put a video scope in to physically see, you know, the voiding and try to make sense of the voids within the wall. And so this is an image that ANA developed to show and put together all their findings, show the interconnectivity between the varied thicknesses of stone and the brick backup, and show where in yellow where there's voids that are found behind it. And what's happening is that water's getting from the top down and getting in between the brick and the stone and washing away, you know, the water soluble mortar. And with that, you know, loose rubble and loose pieces of rubble end up, you know, falling into voids and become little pockets and little, you know, air gaps that can get trapped. And then, you know, as voids are opened, it allows water or invites water back into it. And so, you know, this is an area we need to address because these voids are present now and they're only going to get worse if they're not attended to.
So when we received the report from ANA, we all had a meeting, and, you know, I'll add that Catherine and Luke are in all of these meetings and are following everything that's going on as we are sort of in real time discovering them ourselves. And so we put together, we had a lot of discussions about, well, what can we actually do? I mean, we don't want to take the entire bell tower apart and rebuild it. How can we actually do this? And so Jenna and Ed and her team at Silman put together some sort of schematic approaches to how to address the fact that in many places, this is the top two floors specifically of the bell tower, the sandstone on the exterior is pulling away from the brick. And this is a life safety hazard. It's a potential life safety hazard. And the issue is you never know the tipping point. What will cause a piece of stone or a piece of the wall to suddenly, you know, fall over, which you don't ever want to have. So Jenna, I'll go to the next slide.
Yeah, and I can
a little bit about this.
Yeah, exactly. So the detailing that I've shown in this schematic level drawing is an approach we've used very successfully in a wide variety of buildings that are of the same construction as the church tower. And we're hoping that it minimizes costs in terms of level of reconstruction and actual removal and replacement of stone. So what we're recommending is that in yellow on the image are the areas where we would physically disassemble and rebuild the stone. We have localized areas below the parapet that the stone has moved so much that in order to safely put it back, we think a mason should take it out and clean up the mortar and repatch it and put it back. At the parapet, we were thinking about, you know, what makes the most sense. And we do know that we're going to have to, you know, work on the roof flashing and do something at the lower level of the parapet. And we also know that the most significant separation between the stone and the brick is around those the clock towers. And so we think that it's in the best interest to at least locally remove and reset the parapet down to the top part of the clock surrounds. For the rest of the area, what we think the approach should be is that we do mechanical stainless steel helical ties that are installed from the inside. So they go through the brick and they actually go through the brick, the full thickness of the brick, and they anchor to the back side of the stone. And we do that at a regular enough pattern that you don't have to do it with every single stone. You just do it in a grid-like pattern so that you're grabbing a good amount of stone, and then the rest of the stone around it gets repointed and everything is adhered to one another, both mechanically with the anchors and then through the repointing campaign around the anchors. Does that give enough explanation?
Yeah, well, and then we would, we'd also be installing grout in these voids to,
yes,
as a backup to the helical anchors. And so, of course, we're showing you the highlights to get to the cost, which is what we're going to finish with. But I did just want to mention that there are other issues in the bell tower. The worst issues, the life safety issues, are the top two stories. There is work that needs to be done on the bottom 2 stories as well, but it doesn't rise to the level of concern as the top 2 stories. So with all of that, we have been working with the cost estimator and the whole team, going back and forth, identifying what we can do with the money that we currently have, what is the best way to phase the project. And we have to put into all of this the fact that it's not just toilet paper and bottled water that you can't get. The construction industry has been hit very, very hard by the pandemic, by the supply chain and lack thereof. It takes months to get simple things like wood, lumber, steel, curtain wall. Pretty much every project I have under construction right now is backed up by 7 months plus, just because it takes so long to get everything and you're not sure when it's going to get here. So we had to take all of that into account. And how do you address the fact that you don't know when stuff can arrive? And we have a very complicated building roof line. And so how we design and how we work with contractors to develop the scaffolding is also going to be very complicated. So the overall cost, if we were to do all of the work at the building on the exterior right now, which includes, we're calling phase 1, A and B, all of the bell tower, and then the rest of the work, front porch, staircase, ramp, other roofing, which probably could also be in phase 1, and then all of the interior plaster work, it's about $2 million if we were able to do all of the work right now. But we know we can't do all of the work right now. We have enough money, enough funding right now through the grant of the $500,000 grant, through another grant from the Landmarks Conservancy in New York City, and through the fundraising and campaign that Luke and the vestry have done to do phase 1A, which is what we spent most of the time showing you as the top 2 floors of the bell tower, because that is our immediate life safety issue. And that is just about $900,000. What would we like to do? We'd all like to do this all at once because it's much more efficient. It's much cheaper to do everything at once. If we have to break everything up into a separate phase, each time we have to prepare a separate set of bid documents. Each time we have to go out to bid. You pray that you get the same contractor. I worked on a project a few years ago, one of the Newport mansions, where they had done one wall with one contractor and another wall with another contractor, and everything was different. And we had to redo everything again. And so there are all these big issues. What do you do with the scaffolding? Do you have to build the scaffolding for phase 1A, and then do you take it down and then do you put it back up? Every time you put up scaffolding and take it down, it costs more money. Every time we do a phase and we have to bid it because this is state money we're using, it's more expensive for the church. It's more expensive for the project. Right now, our fee includes design documents for one phase. So then you have to pay the design team for preparation of bid documents and working with the state to get through all of that. So in any event, it's just so that you understand, I didn't total it because it depends when we do it all. And if we did it all right now, it would be, we would hope, about $2 million. But if we have to, break it into separate phases, each phase will add a little bit more money for the design team costs, for the scaffolding, and who knows what will be happening with the supply chain in the coming years. So we're really looking at and focusing on this phase 1A that we're calling the 2 top stories of the bell tower because of the significance, the life safety hazards, about $900,000. We hope. The supply chain is really impacting the projects, all the construction projects. And I did just want to mention, because I know over the past year and a half, people have asked me, well, when we do this work, we're going to repair all of this. Well, of course, we all want to repair this because you have to look at it every time you come in the church. The problem is, this is the least problematic of all of the issues at the church. This is just a symptom that's showing what's going on everywhere else. If we paid $50,000, I don't know, 20 or 50, anywhere from $20,000 to $50,000 to do all the repairs here in phase 1A. By the time we get back to the final phase, we would probably have to do it again. You want to do the exterior work and all the roofing first, then you let the building dry for a year before you actually do the interior work. So my suggestion would be to welcome the plaster deterioration. And hopefully, who knows, maybe we'll be able to find some funding so we can do it sooner rather than later. But it is not a life safety hazard. So what are the next steps? After today's meeting, we'll be setting up a meeting with the State Historic Preservation Office folks so we can take them basically through this presentation and the cost estimate. And then we as a team will prepare the construction documents specifically for this phase of work, unless in the next couple of months we suddenly find the money. I mean, we would love to do the whole bell tower at once if we could. That would be a little bit over $1 million. So somewhere between now and the beginning of 2022, we'll be putting this package out to bid for contractors with the intent of starting construction in the spring. And there you have it. That's our summary of the many issues that are going on.
Just to correct one thing about the price points.
Yes.
We actually don't have the full $900,000. We have to come up with a little bit more. We have more like 700. So we're still about 200K short for the first phase. But I believe God is good and we'll figure out a way to get there. Even if we have to kind of find other resources. We do have an endowment, not that we want to touch it, but sometimes when you have life safety issues, as someone in the vestry pointed out, if a stone falls and kills someone, you have no endowment. So there are ways in which we have to do this, but we'd have 700 committed to the project. We have to find the other 200.
Yeah, and I will add, the reason it took so long to sort of justify our and revise the cost estimate was we were trying to get the phase 1A work, the life safety hazard work, down to that 700,000. And we just, at this point, could not see getting it below the 900,000. So any questions?
I have a question to ask, if I might. What damage did the lightning cause to the church?
The lightning?
Yes.
So it was this tower? Or no,
The other side.
the other side.
Yeah. So it hit one of the 4 turrets, the one on the north eastern exposure, and it basically fragmented that, and we had to take it down. But it's only part of what it caused. It also fried the electronics of the bell system. Insurance covered most of those costs, but not all of them. We decided to upgrade the bell operating system at that time. So we basically had about $20,000 or $30,000 out of pocket, and insurance covered the rest. It was about a $175,000 job. And if you were to stand on the ground and look at the 4 turrets, you would notice that the one that was struck by lightning is probably 2/3 of the size of the other ones, which tells us water is penetrating and the stones are pushing apart. And so I think it is an area of concern. Does that answer your question, Gordon?
It does. My only other question would be, did the lightning strike contribute to any of the other problems that we're finding with the bell tower?
No. The rest of the building is really, the damage is coming from water and it's coming from original construction. And one of the big issues is the roof and the flashing throughout. And a lot of the issues are the original design, which we see a lot. They did amazing things 100 years ago, but there are often errors, which you can see. Was it the design? Was it the architect? Was it the contractor? It was probably a combination. And we find 100 years, but hey, this building was built in 1894. It's still standing. We want to make sure it continues to stand. And so I think, we've reached the point where we really need to make some of these repairs to make sure that we don't lose your endowment because a piece of one of these blocks falls.
There's a question in the chat about, is the damage accelerating each year? Is the rate of damage accelerating?
Yes, I mean, it's hard to put a percentage in what the acceleration is. And that is one of the complications with construction, as you know, from the horrible collapse we saw in Miami earlier this year. Everything is fine until it isn't. And you're never quite sure when the tipping point will be, which is why, as architects and engineers, with the type of insurance we have to have, our insurance agents always remind us to say that something's a potential life safety hazard, because only God knows exactly when we'll reach the tipping point on many of these stones. I mean, we have a better idea since we were able to do all of this evaluation and the non-destructive, so we can see. We were able to get up there, so we were able to see, okay, there aren't any stones that look like they're going to fall right this minute. So that's something that is very positive from the fact that we were able to get up there with these lifts and touch. There's nothing like being able to touch these stones and the turrets. Jenna and I, even though we could see all the photos from the drone, we made sure that we had time to go up and look at these stones ourselves, because if we're making a recommendation that we have to rebuild all of this, we have to be pretty darn sure that that's the right thing to do. And there are other things that need to be done at the church too. We probably need to reevaluate the whole drainage system at some point, and every one of the walls around the church and inside the little courtyard need to be repointed. That was all identified in the original plan, but they're not life safety hazards. The hope is, as we do these the bell tower, for example, the front porch, and it becomes very clear the appropriate way to do the repointing, then hopefully we can do a little bit more each year on each of the other walls as well. Any other questions?
Linda asked in the comments, how are you redesigning the flashings?
That's what we're not quite sure about yet. So part of the issue with, if we look at the bell tower here, I showed you an image earlier. You know what, let's go back to the original design is really funky. Here it is. The flashing should be much higher. It should be up around here. And because of the way there's this crenellation, they put it down here, which is really kind of useless. So since it appears we are going to be rebuilding all of this, we will probably rebuild the back of the walls in such a way that we can put flashing up higher. It's called through wall flashing because the flashing should go almost all the way through. Sometimes it does go all the way through because the flashing is supposed to, the water is in the masonry, it hits the flashing brings it out to the roof and to the drains. That's not happening here or over the porch. And so we need to take, we basically need to take these blocks apart and redesign the flashing. And Jenna and Ed, her colleague, and I have done a variety of pretty complicated masonry rebuilds like this with parapets and flashing.
There's a question Chris asked about city district heat. Was it installed at the church, and did it impact the porch area? The answer is no, it hasn't installed here, and so therefore it has not impacted the porch area. Any other questions?
I have a question. Barbara, you mentioned earlier in the presentation about how the stones absorb water.
Mm-hmm.
So once we make these repairs on the bell tower and we reinstall the flashings properly, there's still a lot of exposed stone that's going to obviously get wet. Will that amount of moisture continue to cause problems going forward?
Water will always be there, will always cause issues. What we're looking at doing here, I mean, as we mentioned, the building has been standing since 1894. So it's gotten to the point where we have to make some significant repairs, which is not unusual. So the hope is that what we do, will protect the building and all of the pedestrians and users of the building. And you'll be in good shape for another 100 years. So we'll be bringing the two walls together, the interior brick wall, the exterior sandstone, with the connections that Silman have recommended so that the wall will be solid again. Water will get in there. The whole idea of flashing and roofing and mortar joints is that you design it in such a way that when the water gets in, because it will, you can relieve the water. And so right now the water just is not being relieved properly almost anywhere. And so the major approach is to make sure we can get the water when it falls on the roof or gets sucked into the walls, that we can get it out without causing more life safety hazards and damage, immediate life safety hazards.
I have a
Thank you.
question about the pointing. Over the years, we have had the entire church repointed. Have they used the wrong water soluble pointing, or was there some other kind they could have used, which would have been better?
Yes. So as we mentioned, there are probably at least 7 different types of mortar. In some places there's grout or epoxy. What we have done is we've identified areas that we've found original pointing, and our conservator has had it all tested. So we know it's a lime-based mortar. Some of the later mortars that were used were Portland cement, which are too hard. And so that's starting to accelerate and cause cracking. Fortunately, the building is so strong. Medina sandstone is such a strong material that we're just starting to see the beginning of cracking from the inappropriate pointing. But that's why I mentioned over the years, we are hopeful that we can redo all of the pointing with the appropriate mortar.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And Barbara, to the point of repointing, the interior red brick walls up in the bell tower, we know we've seen some pretty serious deterioration on those upper floors, like you mentioned. Is there any concern with driving those helical piles through those bricks, or will they need to be repointed as well on the inside of the bell tower?
So actually the project includes full repointing of the exterior and interior of the bell tower, which we had always planned even before we understood the significance of the what was going on with the structural connection of the wall.
Awesome.
So you typically do not want to repoint an entire building. You usually don't need to, but this is a situation where the repointing, the mortar that's been used over the years, it's either washed away or the inappropriate one. And so this is one instance where we do recommend, and in the bell tower, there are whole areas where the mortar is just gone. And so that needs to be replaced.
The diagram that you showed with the yellow highlighted repairs that were needed, I'm assuming that was like the south side or one side of the bell tower. Are the other 3 sides similarly in need of repair, or?
Yes, this is the sketch that Jenna did. This is of the south wall, but it's pretty much the same. It'll be different locations of some of the stones, but this whole area is pretty much the same around the entire top.
All the way around.
Yeah, all the way around. A lot of it's because of the way that the image I just showed you about the roof, how the flashing was just never designed at the proper level. Water, it rains, and there's only one drain that comes down the side of the building here, comes out here. And the water is, it rains and the water just gets in everywhere. And it's been causing all of the damage to the mortar. And it's been accelerating the separation of the brick wall, the brick backup wall to the Medina sandstone.
What is the roof itself composed of?
Oh, it's just a asphalt roof. It's nothing fancy.
Yeah, it's steel framed with sheathing, I believe. And there's areas where the steel's there's a corner of the building that's really wet and the steel actually is fully corroded and actually has fallen.
I think that's this corner.
Yeah.
The south wall, it definitely has some of the worst damage.
The bells will all have to be removed then?
No,
No? Okay.
no.
Good.
Yeah, so one of the interesting parts of discussions that Barbara and I have had on site is how we stage this and what kind of scaffolding we need to work in and around the bells. And yeah, the idea would be and what kind of manpower and equipment can we get up past the bells into the roof air, into that highest level in order to perform the work up there. Yeah, so we are not recommending removing the bells or any of that in that space behind the
And their
louvers.
structure looks solid and safe?
Yeah, they have heavy timber framing that's in remarkably good condition.
Great.
Does there need to be some contingency for our lovely weather for the freeze thaw?
Well, I think that sort of goes with one of the question from Jessica in the chat, which is, in the future, would it be appropriate to create a long-term plan for masonry maintenance of the building? And absolutely. One of the things you always want to do is have a cyclical maintenance plan so that 10 years, 5 years, every spring and fall, the building maintenance staff or crew or Luke's dad knows what needs to be done. And so freeze thaw, when, in the Northeast, is definitely is part of the whole issue, because we're getting all this water in this building. You've got water flowing in between the brick and the sandstone, and then it's freezing. And then when it melts and it cracks, and it sort of pushes the stone out some more. So it's something you can never really get away from living in, the Northeast, where this is part of our climate.
And that's why having a breathable mortar repointing campaign is key, because like Barbara said, moisture is going to get in the wall, but if you have the right mortar, it's going to allow it to get out before it gets cold enough to freeze and cause that pressure that causes that cracking and that displacement.
So hopefully we will get this put out to bid. So we did these what we call these qualified bids package to hire a masonry contractor to do the probes for us and then to work with us in doing the non-destructive evaluation. We ended up hiring R.E. Kelly, who has worked at the building before, and we are really, really happy with their work. Unfortunately, we can't just say we'll continue with them for the whole project because it's state money. We have to bid the construction. But we write very specific specifications that identify all the qualifications that the contractors and the superintendent of the contractor has to have. So I'm pretty confident that we will have a very good contractor, that we will be starting construction next spring. And one of the things we've spent a lot of time talking about with all the team and Luke and Catherine as well is how we build the scaffolding, where we will do it, how can we stage it so that we have the least amount of impact to entering the church for services and events. Will we have to close the bell tower entrance down for a while? And so that will be part of the construction plan. We will work with the church to identify the best way, which might have to change as, during construction.
Other questions? We're also accepting checks at this time.
Yes. Do you have your scanner out, Luke? So, the one thing I did want to mention is, so we received this grant and it's a reimbursable. So Luke and Catherine have to send in invoices and get paid back from the state. So the church has to pay expenses, whether it's the design fees, the contractor, the construction work, and then submit it to the state, and the state reimburses. The good thing is, so last year, this grant was put on hold, this grant submission process, because of the pandemic. It started up again this year. We are hopeful it will continue it will continue for the next however many years. As long as we are able to show that we are making progress on one grant, you are allowed to have up to 3 grants open at the same time. So what I am hoping is that if we get this under construction in the spring, we will be allowed to apply for another $500,000 next July or the following July, however the construction schedule ends up being. And hopefully, we could get up to 3 grants of $500,000 each time, which, 1.5 million would not be bad. That would almost cover this project.
One more quick one for you. What would be the time frame of this primary phase, just for those top 2 floors of the bell tower, of actual construction work?
Well, I think it depends on how we just end up designing the scaffolding. I mean, I'd love to get it done in one construction season. I'm not sure that we can. It really will depend. I mean, that's something we'll look to the contractor to help us with the means and methods. So what's interesting when you do preservation work as opposed to like new design work, architects and engineers who work with contractors for preservation usually work very closely with the contractors to identify what we call means and methods of scaffolding and of what the process is for taking the brick and the stone off. In new construction, you don't typically do that. So our goal is to find a really good contractor team to come on board with us in the spring, and then we can have all these very complex discussions about the best way to set up the scaffolding and how to move forward and how quickly. They may need to do one wall to see how long it takes. And of course, the longer it takes, the more money it costs, just when you have to stop during winter, or you have to use heaters. I mean, and this is the kind of work, masonry work, you don't want to do during the winter. So there's still a lot of questions. We're still working a lot of stuff out. And that's pretty much where we are right now. And now we'll be preparing the construction documents. And so getting very detailed, our understanding of how to set everything up until we bring in a contractor and can work with them for the actual means and methods.
Thank you, Barbara, for this wonderful presentation. I think it was very clear, and I know I've fielded lots of questions over the last couple of years, and I think this is a helpful resource for folks to have a clear sense of exactly all that went into it. And the bishop texted me offline and just said, this is fascinating. And of course I said, for $180,000, it better be fascinating, because this stuff costs, right? But without studies, without a proper understanding, there's no sense investing any of the money in it, because we can't figure out what to do. So I'm so thankful for you and your team putting this together. And thanks for everyone for showing up tonight to learn a bit more.
Yes, thank you, everyone. And we're always happy to answer questions. And we love our client. Luke and Catherine are just the best clients because they're so knowledgeable and they're so passionate, and they both, are always in all the meetings. And so it's the best kind of client to have.
And we pay promptly.
And you pay promptly.
That's helpful.
Very helpful. Thank you. Well, thank you, everyone. Look forward to seeing you, hopefully in person sometime soon.
Thank you, Barbara. Thanks, Jenna. Thanks, everyone. See you all later.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.